For the topic of building conditions assessment, we will be covering on the safety of building, the structural integrity of building. We'll look at the example of the building collapse happen, why this is buildings collapse happen. We will look at the importance of why building conditions assessment need to be carried out. In local Malaysia conditions, we will learn about what is the rules and regulations and that is available in Malaysia and how is our building conditions being assessed based on our local rules and legislations. We will also be discussing about the guidelines to implement the building conditions assessment in Malaysia. The collapse of the 12-story residential building at Camping Tower South at South Florida, United States of America in June 2021 has killed at least 5 people and 156 more cannot be found. This has raised the concern on the building safety, not only globally but also in our country. The question is our building safe? How important is building assessment? In this Florida building collapse, basically, a building assessment has been carried out by the engineering consultant, and the engineering consultant in their report has warned that there is major defect in the Florida building in October 2018, even before the buildings collapsed this year. In the building assessment report, it was highlighted that major structural defects to the concrete platform beneath the swimming pool deck were detected. The engineers has also detected waterproofing errors and also that many cracks below the structural slab as well as cracking at the column, beam and wall in the parking garage. All the photo that you see and shown here basically are the actual photo from the structural assessment report, which shows the major crack and defect of the Florida building that's collapsed. However, it is important to note that rectification works were not carried out in this building, and this has led to the collapse of the Florida building in June 2021. Does this event only happen in the US? Is this the isolated cases? Just 2 weeks ago, basically, we have learned about the new Hong Kong Pavilion Farm flat in Taiwan. Construction building of more than 10 floors needs to be demolished because the building assessment has found that the building is not safe for occupancy and there are major structural integrity issue which may have be hazardous for occupancy. The defect was found from the building assessment that the contractor have used grade 40 concrete instead of the grade M80 concrete that is specified in the design. As a result of this, the whole 2 block of the Pavilion Farm flat needs to be demolished and rebuilt. This is how serious a building conditions can be. So, does building collapse only happen in US or Hong Kong in overseas? The question is, will this building collapse happen in our country? Is our building in Malaysia safe for occupancy? This is one of the recent incidents of building collapse in our country. It happens in May 2019, where a building in Gombak near LRT terminal in Taman Melawati, it collapsed and 2 Indonesian foreign workers were killed and 3 workers were injured as a result of this building collapse. Is this also an isolated cases? No. Many would remember the Highland Tower collapse in Bukit Antara Bangsa. So this is one of the worst case of building collapse, high-rise building collapse in our history. It happened in 1993, where the Block 1 of the Highland Towers collapsed completely and killed 48 people as a result of a mud landslide near this area. It is a huge site development in Bukit Antarbangsa, and not only that the Block 1 of this building will collapse and many people were killed. Many people lost their homes because all the occupants or house owner in Block 2 and Block 3A were instructed to vacate their home, leave their houses, and all the units and houses, apartments in the condominium Block 2 and Block 3 were abandoned. All these previous owners lost their home overnight. Besides this, we have still a few other famous buildings collapse that actually happens in our country. Among them is the Sultan Abidin Stadium roof collapse. This collapse Sultan Mizan Zainal Abidin and Stadium in Kuala Terengganu. The whole roof collapsed due to trusses failure, and luckily there is no casualty. However, nearer incidents to us where the Jaya supermarket and buildings collapsed, and in 2009, and 7 people were killed during that buildings collapse. All these incidents has raised the concern of the building safety in Malaysia. How safe is our building in Malaysia then? Generally in Malaysia, we have many pre-colonial age buildings that are still being occupied and in use. Is this building verified in terms of structural integrity and safety for occupancy? In Malaysia, we have also many aged buildings, whether residential as well as commercial, that are still being occupied and in use. Some of these buildings can be more than 30 or 40 years old. So residents are staying there. These are their only home and the place for them to stay. We cannot ask the residents to move out from their homes, but how do we assure that the home that they are staying are safe for occupancy? What is the rules and regulations in Malaysia to ensure that our building in Malaysia is safe? In Malaysia, we have the Uniform Building Bylaw 1984, which are enacted under the Street and Drainage Act 1974, which we call this the Act 133. The purpose of the Act is to amend and consolidate the law related to street, drainage, and building in the local authority area in West Malaysia and for the purpose of connected them with. Whereas it is desirable to introduce the form of the Act of Parliament, a uniform system with respect to the street and drainage building in the local authority area in Peninsular Malaysia. What this means is that the whole purpose of the Street and Drainage Building Act 1974, or Act we call Act 133, is that this act is meant to introduce a uniform system for all the local authority in Peninsular Malaysia. Prior to 1974, each local authority and state have their own regulations and law related to street, drainage, and building. Every local authorities enact their own street, drainage, and buildings regulations, and it was not uniform at all. So the Act 133 was enacted, was passed in Parliament with the whole purpose to uniform the system and requirement for the street drainage building for all local authority in Peninsular Malaysia. Subsequently, the Uniform Building Bylaw were enacted in 1984 under this Act 133. The Uniform Building Bylaw 1984, enacted under the Street Drainage and Building Act, stipulates that all new buildings require submission of plan for approval prior to construction by a principal submitting person, such as the professional architect and professional engineers. Not only that we are required to submit the plan prior to constructions, any modifications on or rectifications and or changes made to a constructed building needs to have the approvals as from the local council. These are specified in the Uniform Building Bylaw UBBL 1984. Besides the Act 133 and Uniform Building Bylaw, the Uniform Building Bylaw has stipulated all the building structures requirement related to the design and specification of the material, loading, foundations, and superstructure, which govern the design, specification, and construction of the wall, floor, and building structure. UBBL 1984 not only stipulate the structural requirement, but it also stipulate all the constructions requirement and fire requirement of a building. The design specifications such as imposed load, general requirement of the loading, aims, the requirements for stacking, the loading on the roof, of and the wall are all captured in the structural requirement for this UBBL 1984. The construction requirement covers all items such as the building site, drainage, subsoil drainage, protections against soil erosions, wall thickness, etc. The UBBL 1984 also stipulates the construction, the fire safety requirement, and such as the rules for compartmentalization of the building, the provisions of the fire exits, the separation of fire risk area, type of wall or for safety purposes, and all other fire safety requirements. These are all specified in the UBBL 1984. So basically what this means is that our UBBL 1984 Uniform Building Bylaw already have laid down the fundamental requirement for structural, construction, and fire requirement of a building. It is more on the implementations that make sure that our design of the building are carried out by professionals and complies to all the requirements specified. Under the Street and Drainage and Building Act 1994, or we call this Act 133, the Section 85A of this Act 133 requires that any building that are 5-story and above, exceeding 10 years old, needs to be inspected by a professional engineers registered under the Registrations of Engineers Act 1967. This act also specifies that the responsibilities to carry out the periodic building inspections lies in the owner of the building upon notice served by the local authority. Section 85A of the Street, Drainage and Building Act 1974, or what we call Act 133, state that the mandatory requirement for the periodic inspections of buildings, which are more than 5-story high and after 10 years, commencing from the issuance of Certificate of Fitness or Certificate of Completion and Compliance, CCC, of the building. So this Act 133 Section 85A has specifically required that any building which are more than 5-story high exceeding 10 years to carry out the periodic building inspection. The periodic building inspection shall be carried out by a registered professional engineers, and if after having the visual inspection, if the engineer suspect that there is, in his opinion, that there is a defect, deformations or deterioration in the building or the structural element, which will or will likely endanger or reduce the structural stability or integrity of any parts of the building, he shall then require for permissions from the local authorities to carry out a full structural investigations on the building, on the structural element. Okay, so the professional engineers which will be employed appointed by the building owner will carry out the periodic building inspections through two methods: visual inspection and also structural investigation where necessary. The local authority or the PBT in Malaysia have their own guidelines for periodic building inspections of building. In Malaysia, each local council or local PBT have their own guideline on periodic building inspections. These are just a sample of the periodic guideline on the periodic building inspection, where the guideline on the right hand side, the brown color, is the guideline published by DBKL. The one on the left, the white color, is the guideline published by Majlis Perbandaran Kajang of Kajang Local Town Council. So, as discussed earlier, periodic building inspections will be initiated by the local council through a notice served to the designated premise owner thus to carry out the visual inspection. The designated premise owner will then be responsible to appoint a professional engineers to carry out the visual inspection of the building. Upon the visual inspections, the engineers will produce a visual inspection report. If the visual inspection report finds that there is no structural defect found, then the local council will then issue an inspections completion certificate to the designated building owner. If during the visual inspections, the professional engineers found that there may be potential errors of structures defect, the engineers can recommend to the local council to carry out structural investigation report. The local council will then issue a notification letter to the designated premise owner to carry out structural investigations. Upon the structural investigations, if there is any structural defect that is being found, then the owner will be responsible to carry out the rectification works to ensure the building is safe and structurally sound for occupancy. However, in the worst case scenario, if the structural defect on the building is found to be very severe and cannot be rectified, and the building is not safe for occupancy, the engineers, the local council have the right to instruct for the closures and demolitions of the building by the previous owner. Okay, so this is how the flow chart of the periodic building inspection. So, in summary, periodic building inspection is carried out on building to determine their structural safety, soundness, and integrity. Building owner is fully responsible for the premise with respect to the safety and well-being of their inhabitant. So, the Act 133 has made it very clear that the responsibility to carry out the periodic building inspection lies in the designated premise owner. The Section 85A of the Act 133 has made it very clear that it is mandatory for the building that is more than 5-story high and more than 10 years to carry out this periodic building inspection. So what is the timeline for these periodic building inspections? The timeline for the periodic building inspections start counting from the first CF or the first Certificate of Completion and Compliance CCC that is being issued to the building owner. On the maximum of 10 years, the local council have the right to call for the first periodic building inspection. And not after what will happen after 10 years. In the next 10 years, the local council can issue another notice for another periodic building inspection. Thereafter, the local council can issue a periodic building inspection at every 10 years interval. So, what are the parties involved? The parties involved are the local town council, which are responsible to ensure that the inspections are carried out in accordance to the requirement of the Act and the guideline of the periodic inspection of the building. The local town council is also responsible to issue out the notice to the designated building owner to carry out this periodic building inspection. Local council will be responsible to ensure building these inspections are being carried out by and the inspection report are satisfactory and the building is safe after the periodic inspection of building is being carried out. The Act has specified very clearly the responsibility to carry out the periodic building inspection lies in the designated premises building owner. So the building owners will be responsible to appoint a registered professional engineers to conduct the inspection. The registered professional engineers needs to conduct the inspections through visual inspection or structural investigation when necessary to ensure that the assessment are made and the building are structural stable and the structural stability and the integrity of the building is safe for habitations in the opinion of the professional engineers. In the event there is any requirement for rectifications or repair works, the professional engineers who did the inspections will need to make the recommendations for the rectifications works. In the worst case scenario, where the rectification is very severe and the building is not safe for occupancy, the professional engineers have the right to recommend to the town council that demolition works is required, and the town council have the right to instruct the previous owner to demolish the building if it is found to be unsafe for occupancy. Generally, each local council have their own guideline for periodic inspections. At the current situations, that the guideline for these periodic building inspections are not uniform. Each local council have their own requirement, and however, most of these guidelines by the local council will have the same measures component, such as the guideline for the periodic inspections, the guideline for the visual inspection and how the reporting format, the content of the visual inspection report, the guideline for a full structural investigations, the guideline for design and specifications for the repair works, and the guideline for the report after the rectification works. Okay, so every local council have their own guideline, but the guideline will specify the same measures component in the guideline that needs to be followed by the designated premise owner as well as the professional engineers who is going to be appointed to carry out this periodic building inspection. The Act has specified very clearly that the responsibility to carry out the periodic building inspections lies in the owner of the building upon notice served by the local authority. Therefore, the local authority will serve the notice untuk pemeriksaan bangunan secara berkala or the notice for periodic building inspections to the designated building owner. So once the building owner receives this notice, the building owner are responsible to carry out the periodic building inspection. So the owner of the building will be responsible to appoint a professional engineers to carry out the periodic building inspection. So what happened is the building owner need to fill up a form that certify that he have appointed a professional engineers registered under the Registration of Engineer Act 1967 and submit to the local council on his appointment of the professional engineers to carry out the building inspections works. After the appointment of a professional engineers, The professional engineers will start by carrying out a visual inspection. During on the visual inspection by the professional engineers needs to check and ensure that there is no sign of any major structural defect on the building and the building is safe for occupancy. Upon the visual inspections, the professional engineers can make 3 recommendations. After the visual inspections, the professional engineers can recommend that due to there's no visual sign of any major defect. Besides that, the second option the professional recommendation engineers can make is that there is defect observed during the visual inspection, that the defect require monitoring, but it does not warrant for structural investigations to be carried out. This rectification works, if any, can be carried out during the inspections work. So all the minor crack or minor defect can be carried out during the visual inspection, and the defect only require monitoring and structural investigation are not required. However, the engineers detect any major structural defect, the engineers can call and recommend for a full structural investigations to be carried out in the event the engineers find that there are signs of potential defects on the building or the slope protection system surrounding the building. Okay, so this is where this recommendation will be informed to the local council through a CJ Pemeriksaan visual or a visual inspection certificate that is issued by the professional engineers employed by the designated building owner. If structural investigation is required, the engineers will then require to carry out a structural investigation based on the structural plan that have been prepared. And if there are defects that are required, then the engineers will need to prepare a report and a proposal on how to do the repair and rectifications works to the building. The detailed proposal of these rectifications works will be passed to the designated premise owner, and the designated premise owner are responsible to carry out the rectifications works according to the recommendations by the engineers who do the building inspection. So after this means that after the structural inspection is being carried out, the engineers can make 2 recommendations. One of the recommendations the engineers can make is that the structural plan has been prepared and there is no major structural defect found during the structural inspection. In the other recommendations the engineers can make is that the structural plan has been prepared, but structural defect has been detected and needs to be rectified by the premise owner or the joint management building of the premises. Okay, so this certificate of structural inspections or CJ Pemeriksaan structure will be signed off and issued by the professional engineers and submitted to the local council. Will be submitted to the respective local council in compliance to the Act 133. So upon receiving the structural investigation report, the designated building premise owner needs to carry out all the rectification as per the recommendations of the engineers. Thus, once all the rectification works has been completed, the engineers will need to do another inspection to ensure that all the rectifications works has been completed to the satisfaction of the inspection engineer. The engineers will then need to submit a CJ Penyiapan Kerja Perbaikan, or in other words, a completion of rectification certificates to the local town council if the local council find that the accepted the completion rectification works certificate by the professional engineers, the local town council will then issue a certificate of completion of inspections to the previous owner as a mean that the periodic building inspections has been completed. It is important to take note also that in most of the local council guidelines for periodic building inspection, there is a checklist for the visual inspection report where it specifies all the requirement on the visual inspection report, including how to report on the defect, structural defect, damages, deformations, and or deteriorations of the building. All the scope of inspection works, details of the building structural system, conditions of the building, defects monitoring, and, and deformations and any rectifications and modification works that is being done to the building needs to be included in the visual inspections report. Okay, and the inspection report will also call for all the photos, comments, and also recommendations by the professionals that is being employed to carry out the visual inspection. Beside the visual inspection checklist, usually the guidelines of the periodic building inspection from the local town council will also include the checklist for a full structural inspection report, or sometimes in Malay they call Senarai Semak Laporan Penyiasatan Penuh Structure. So it will include the scope of inspection required, the building informations, and the source of the design and construction and repair works. Thus, the checklist for the design and the new structural plans that needs to be prepared. Any test that needs to be carried out needs to be included in this structural report. Okay, the scope of works for the rectifications works also needs to be included in the structural inspection report, and this needs to be endorsed by the professional engineers and submitted to the local town council. Besides the Act 133A and the Uniform Building Bylaw and the periodic building inspection, in Malaysia, we also have the Fire Service Act 1988, which we call Act 341. This Fire Service Act 1988 or Act 341 require that all designated premises to undergo an annual fire inspections before they are issued with a fire certificate by the Fire and Bomb Rescue Department or BOMBA. The Act 341 can not only specify the fire certificate requirement for fire certificate, which needs to be carried out by the designated premise owner and renewed annually. This Act of Fire Service Act 1988 also specify all the regulations and guideline requirements for the safety of the buildings or premises. All the fire protection system that is necessary to be installed in the building, such as the active fire protection system and the passive fire protection system that are needed, are all specified in the Fire Service Act 1988, Act 341. The active fire protection system, including the fire hose, fire requirement for fire hydrant, the sprinkler system, fire alarm, and also fire detection systems, are all considered the requirement of active fire protection. Then, and there is also the requirements for passive fire protection, such as compartmentalizations of the building, provisions of safety exit, and how exit roads, etc. So all these requirements are clearly specified in the Fire Service Act 1988, or the act we call Act 341. All building owners needs to comply with the Fire Service Act 1988, and all the designated premise owner needs to ensure that the fire certificate are renewed annually. Okay, fire inspection is carried out before the fire certificate is being issued by Bomba. What have we discussed so far about the Act 133 of the Street Drainage Edge and Building Act, the UBBL 1984, and the Fire Service Act? All these mean that in Malaysia, we have the legislations, regulations, and guidelines in place for the safety of the building. All the rules, regulations, and guidelines are in place for the safety of our building in Malaysia. However, it is very important that we need to make sure that the enforcement and the implementations of all these legislations, rules, and guidelines are being implemented accordingly. The local authorities play a very important role to ensure that notice are being issued to the designated premise owner, and the designated premise owner needs to make sure that they carry out these inspections for the periodic building inspections and the annual fire inspection annually, to make sure that the building in the previous building are safe for occupancy of all the occupants in the building. So in Malaysia, we come back to the questions that we asked earlier. Is the building in Malaysia safe? In Malaysia, we have many aged buildings, including pre-colonial buildings that are still being occupied and in use. In order to ensure the safety of all these buildings in Malaysia, it is paramount important that all the periodic building inspection and annual fire inspection are strictly implemented in Malaysia. It shall be made mandatory that all designated premises in Malaysia shall display the fire certificate in their building, and all buildings more than 10 years shall display the proof of the periodic building inspection carried out. So, although the rules and regulations in Malaysia are in place, there are still room for improvement. Although the law states that the periodic building inspections are the responsibility of the previous building owner. However, the notice for the periodic building owner are still to be issued out by the local authority. Similarly, we have rules and regulations for fire certificate and periodic building inspection. However, it is not mandatory yet for the premises to display this fire certificate and building inspection. Our rules should make it mandatory for all these buildings to display the fire certificate and the periodic building inspection in the building, so that all the occupants and the people who stay and use the building know that these buildings are safe for occupancy. In the era of Industrial Revolution 4.0, and with the big data technology, we should be able to compare all the information of the building that is more than 10 years in Malaysia and compel all the premise owners to conduct periodic building inspections to ensure the safety and the integrity of all these buildings. The compliance to the regulations specified in the law of Malaysia will ensure that the buildings in Malaysia are safe for occupancy. Okay, as mentioned earlier in our topic today, that currently we still requires the local authority to issue out the notice of periodic building inspections to the pre-designated premise owner for building that is more than 10 years old and more than 5 stories. However, currently, basically, our local authority, yes, they are issuing out this notice, but the notice are issued out in random basis to the designated premise owner. Not all building that is more than 10 years receive this notice from the local authority. Therefore, now we have the big data technology. It is very important that that we should make the database available to our local authority and ensure that any building that is more than 10 years, the notice can be issued out automatically from the database system to all the designated building owner to carry out this building inspection. It is important that building is in Malaysia is not only 10 years old. We have building that is 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, and even more than 50 years old in Malaysia. So the periodic building inspections not only need to be carried out one time after the 10 years old, but it need to be carried out in the interval of every 10 years so that the building are always assured that the building are safe and the structural in integrity a is concerned is safe for occupancy of the those who are staying in and using the building. However, there are many challenges in to deal with all these rules and regulations. Earlier on, we actually have mentioned that the regulations, even though it's at the responsibility of the building owner, the local authorities need to issue out the notice. The local authority also needs to ensure that the legislations are in place. As for this for legislation and the rules and requirement of the act are being enforced by the building owner, and all the building inspections and also the fire inspection are carried out as per the rules and guidelines. The implementations and again is by the building owner, and we need to empower the building owner to carry out this inspection, and even though they did not receive the notice from the local council. We also need to address the issues of the safe pool talent of professional engineers to carry out all this building inspection. If all the building in Malaysia that are more than 10 years old needs to be carried out the building inspection, we will need a large pool of professional engineers to carry out this building inspection. Another challenges that we are facing is also that many of the building does not have any information or as built drawing. Building that is 30 and 40 years old, the building owners or the joint management body, many of them does not have a copy of the building as built plan. So how do they carry out the building inspection when you don't even have the basic information such as the as built drawing of the building? So now with the information of technologies, LiDAR and IoT, we can actually scan and reproduce the as-built information of the building. Okay, government can also assist by giving tax rebate aids to minimize the cost to the building owner. We should also do harmonizations and standardize of all these guidelines. As we learned earlier, now currently every local council have their own standard and guidelines for the periodic building inspection. In future, we should look into harmonizations and standardizations to ensure that all local building council in all the state in Malaysia, they should have one harmonized and standard guideline for building inspection. We need to change the mindset of the building owner and authority that building safety is a very important thing to ensure the safety of the occupant. We should not look at this only from the legislation point of view, but the owner should have the responsibility to ensure that safety is of the occupant of the building is the most important thing. In terms of compliance, we should make sure that the building owner and also the joint management building have a safety and health file record and on all the safety and health file record in all major buildings. We should look into the opportunities and integration of all sectors. Each sector, whether the government, the industry, the civil society, and academia, we have a role to play and to ensure that all the building in Malaysia is safe. The governments through the local council shall enforce all the Act 133 and the Fire Service Act to ensure that the building is safe. The industry needs to make sure that we have competent professional engineers to carry out the building inspections and also the fire inspection. In terms of civil societies is an academia, we play a role to create awareness and also to train up the necessary pool of talent required to carry out all this inspection. The academia and the research institution and play a big role for the new technologies and advancement and on how we can utilize the digitalization of technology to carry out these building inspections and ensure all the buildings in Malaysia are safe for occupancy. We should also look into digitalizations of the building condition assessment using a total build asset management solution and digitalization. Okay, so building inspection should be carried out by competent person to identify the defect and abnormalities at the building. Dilapidation survey should also be carried out. Where required, structural and geotechnical appraisal, investigations and the testing, including non-destructive testing, measurement and monitoring needs to be carried out. The local authority need to review and certify the periodic building inspection report submitted by the professional engineers, and the certifications of the building inspections need to be issued out by the local authority. In the event that there is major structural defect detected, the professional engineers need to provide engineering solutions for rehabilitation or repair works. Okay. Technology such as 3D scanning, beam field verification, and drone technologies can be used to reproduce the as-built information of the building in the event where buildings that does not have those as-built or original building plan. We now have building information modeling and we have real-time collaboration. All these informations from the as-built as well as the services, electrical, mechanical services, of how frequent all these things need to be calibrated. Whether all the fire extinguishers has that been expired or not. How is the safety features of the building? All these can be put into a digitalized information system model with information. By having all this information, we can digitalize this information and implement digitalization in our building. Digital twins of built asset environments can ensure that all the data are being captured in the digitalized information modeling. We need to make sure that all the previous building owners are responsible to have a safety and health file, as well as energy and facility management requirements are properly being kept by the joint management body or the designated premise owner. If all these are being implemented, we can have a total build asset management solutions that can ensure that our buildings are safe for occupancy and the collapse of building will not happen in Malaysia. This is more on the implementations and executions of the building condition and assessment to ensure that all the buildings in Malaysia are safe for occupancy. So in the topic of this building condition assessment today, we have learned many things on this building condition assessment. Just to recap what we have learned, we actually learn and see that there are many examples that building has collapsed, not only in Malaysia, but worldwide, even in the advanced country, such as developed country, such as United States and Hong Kong. We can see that building is collapsed either due to structural defect or the previous owner has ignored the report from the building condition assessment. We have also learned about why building condition assessment is important. Just like the Florida building collapse, the engineers have done the building condition assessment and recommended for repair works to be carried out. However, the building condition assessment were ignored and therefore the disaster happened and the building has collapsed. We have also learned about the rules in Malaysia that on the building safety, where we have the Drainage Street and Building Act, which we call Act 133, A in 1974, and also the Uniform Building Bylaw 1984. All these rules and regulations have actually specified the design requirement and structural construction and also the fire requirement and for a safe building and the requirements for the building conditions assessment to be carried out. We also learn basically that each local authority have a guidelines to carry out periodic building inspection for any building that is more than 5-story height and more than 10 years old. Okay, and this lies on the responsibilities to carry out this periodic building inspection lies at the owner of the building in compliance with the Act 133. Besides Act 133, we also learned that there is the Fire Service Act, which I have highlighted all the fire requirement, safety requirements of the building, including the active fire protection system and the passive fire protection system. The Fire Service Act also require and mandate the designated building owner to carry out annual fire inspection and obtain the fire certificate from the BOMBA. We also learn about the challenges in having the building condition assessment and how we can use technology to digitalize the building conditions assessment. So I hope with this topic and this coverage in these courses, we able to learn about the important, in summary, the importance of the building condition assessment and how the compliance of the rules, regulations that is specified can help us to have building that is safe for occupancy in Malaysia. So with that, we thank everyone for attending this course on building condition assessment. So thank you.